Hi everyone, I'm Rafi, and I'm the co-founder of Falcon Storm. We are a story studio. We guide our clients in essentially uncovering and shaping and sharing their narratives. And those narratives create stronger internal connections within the company and guide engagement with their audience. So it's every bit about storytelling inward facing as it is outward. And for companies in the tech sector, we bring meaning to their sort of amazing technology with character-driven storytelling, because that's kind of our heritage, our background as storytellers, that we are very much character-driven. And our work kind of forges an emotional connection between tech and people, leading to a better product market fit, and essentially it drives growth, particularly for startups. And likewise, not for the tech companies, but for established media companies that are, a lot of them are our clients as well, we help them make smarter choices in tech to advance their production and storytelling capabilities. And that way we help them adapt to the ever-changing landscape of the entertainment space. And beyond our client work, we're really excited to tell our own stories with this is one of them. It's an original scripted animated series called Artina's Art Squad. It's aimed at children aged 6 to 8, but more on that in a bit. At Falcon Storm, we kind of live and breathe storytelling. I'm proud to say we've won a lot of awards for directing live action and animation, as well as production design and developing scripted series in TV and broadcast. And our immersive work in AR and VR won awards for innovation, creative use of tech, and best product and best XR experiences. So we're really proud of that sort of background. And as you might expect, world building is a big part of what we do. You see, we get hired to originate and develop IP into global transmedia franchises all the time. And being a character-led studio means we create the world to support specific characters' journeys. In other words, characters come first and the world comes second. So my role at Falcon Storm is to lead IP development and visual narrative. And in this session, I'll show you how analog materials, as well as digital tools like my Cintiq, coexist in my creative process. And that philosophy is also true for how I approach 3D production in real time with Omniverse, Unreal, and Substance Painter. You see, I'm a relative newcomer to 3D animation. I made a lot of hand-drawn animated shorts early in my career, but really, most of my directing credits are in live action. So dramas like Bates Motel, sci-fi shows like Haven, and crime procedurals like Law & Order SVU, a lot of primetime US TV series. I'm essentially a story guy. The writer's room and working with performers on set are kind of where I cut my teeth for most of my career. And at Falcon Storm, alongside these commercial projects, we believe in applying our expertise in story and tech towards positive social impact. And on this project, we're really privileged to partner with a US-based charity called Curing Kids Cancer and a tech company called Noitom, the makers of a mocap system that we use to produce this show. And together, we've created a live animated improv show that brings joy to isolated and very poorly children in hospitals. And these children get to chat with our original characters because they're performed by a therapist live, and they participate in creative activities and learning art and craft with those characters inside the animated world, all in real time. Some kids connect via webcam, others via tablet, some put on a VR headset, and they all love the escapism and this kind of one-to-one interaction. And I'll show you how I designed some of that CG stuff in a bit. But you probably noticed I was at my drawing desk in the reel that I just played earlier. Drawing is central to my craft. Developing animated properties or illustrating picture books and designing characters or even just planning a live action shoot, they all kind of start with a drawing with me. It could be a napkin doodle or it could be something a bit more worked up like this. I'm in the habit of drawing stuff around the house or sketching at my desk during a Zoom call, or even just capturing moments, quiet moments like that at home. Essentially, I think through the act of drawing. And, with something like these, there's a satisfying tactile feedback loop of loose color pencils, sketching on paper that I get. that eventually translates to my digital artwork using a tablet. And the same goes for environments. And as I said before, the world that I would draw follows the character that comes before. And drawing from life with analog tools like charcoal and pencil and so on is kind of like a well that I constantly go back to. It's infinite, more so than any digital medium that I've found. All these tonal life drawings undoubtedly make me more proficient in my digital painting workflows. So this is an example of blocking out shapes, sort of in a tonal study, and then refining those into specific design language for the character, and then ultimately the color pass. But it doesn't always work necessarily in that order. But I can absolutely trace a connection between my digital workflow with my my analog practice. They kind of share the same foundations, right? Now, analog art materials are unforgiving. Yeah, they don't have an undo button. But I see that as a plus for the medium. There's an enforced discipline that is helpful to me. And who knows, maybe that's what makes me more decisive when I get to the digital phase. And this stuff is all digital, obviously. And of course, when I'm in drawing on the Cintiq and Photoshop or whatever, I do use the undo button, and I use layers and all the benefits of digital. But it's more about the mindset going into that digital phase. I'm essentially committing to an idea that I've spent time thinking through in analog. And for me, that means thinking through on paper. Rather than just jumping into digital and churning out multiple variations because I can with little conviction, I find that that analog practice really keeps me in check. And on any given day, my route to making the right piece of concept art could involve any one of these tools, or a combination of several. And however primitive or modern, I kind of gravitate to whichever tool feels right in the moment. It's kind of like a conduit to the initial spark. And I'm speaking to creators in the room. You know what I mean when I say the initial spark that makes you want to create. I find the tool relates directly to that, whatever I use. And I often need to act quickly, or that spark kind of moves on. And nothing is simpler and more immediate than a stick of charcoal. So it's important for me to hook onto the core feeling from the off and hold on to it when I move through the digital phase. So these Photoshop studies are obviously a study on character and eventually the location. It really helps with retaining the essence as you develop the design, holding on to that spark. And this character in this story, she feels overlooked and forgotten in her world, a nobody in her own city. That was the central thought that drove the whole design. This guy has a chip on his shoulder and a rage kind of brewing just below the surface because he's not quite sure of himself yet, but it's coming. And if you know their emotional state, you can kind of uncover the right energy for your character, and then you can hang the entire character design on that energy. At least that seems to work for me. So from traditional analog art-making tools to digital tools like the Cintiq, I want my process to feel organic, and feeling is really important to me. Now, ironically, modeling 3D characters with a VR controller, which is a mega digital tool, obviously, weirdly, it isn't far off from my analog process. And interestingly, the limits of VR actually make the Cintiq more essential than ever. I'll show you what I mean with examples from our production process on the show Artina's Art Squad. So the main character is modeled in VR. Compared to traditional 3D modeling software, via a flat screen, sculpting inside VR is a lot easier and quicker for someone like me. You see, to me, it's more intuitive, like a natural extension of drawing or even sculpting in real life. You also get a better understanding of the 3D form because you're immersed in the same virtual space as your creation. I don't know how Andy gets amazing organic results with through a 2D screen, but he was fantastic when he demonstrated that. I need to learn more from him. But in VR, the hand tracking in true 3D space makes more sense for designing a 3D model than a flat screen interface with a keyboard, mouse, or even a stylus. That said, the Cintiq does what VR can't. So what do I mean by that? You see, the character is a wooden mannequin with interconnected pieces, bolts and joints, and you can't get that level of precision and control in VR. It's more about laying down chunks of clay. But you can with a Cintiq. Stuff like clean edges, refined shapes, and a crisp silhouette throughout the 3D form. Those are principles in 2D art that still hold true in 3D. And the same goes for texture painting. VR is too low res for anything production worthy. And you can't paint refined, nuanced, detailed textures in VR, but you absolutely can with a Cintiq. So I use VR to block in the main forms and connect with the character so I really understand their proportions and get a sense of how that character is going to move through 3D space. And then bring it onto my Cintiq to develop the design, refine it to a final production quality. So on the left is ink, marker, and pencil on paper, and on the right is a Photoshop study. And those two pieces of concept art were enough to guide the modeling process. Now, this character is a bit more intricate than the last one, and in VR, you can turn on like an immersive grid, kind of like a Photoshop grid, but in 3D space, and you can align things at right angles or 45-degree angles, which was kind of essential to modeling machined parts like this. I also worked in layers, which is another thing you can get in VR. So there's parity with traditional 2D digital tools. And I usually stand when I'm sculpting, because again, it's another way of me connecting with the character. And this character is based on a stop-motion armature. So if anyone's familiar with that stuff, it's usually made out of plastic and metal pieces and bolts that you can pose in real life. So there are a lot of intersecting pieces to deal with. So working with a Cintiq is really the only way I could get things to feel right. And metal joints connect her plastic torso and arms. So in Substance Painter, I had to develop this look and feel with a wide range of materials and textures. So a high-res screen is pretty essential, and the pressure sensitivity and all that sort of stuff. And texturing like this follows on naturally from the concept art that I showed you earlier. So this character called Rivette, she has a plastic body, wooden hands, and hips and feet, metal joints, and a razor for her head, which is topped with the Play-Doh hair, pushpin eyes, and paperclip monocle. That's a lot of materials, right? And textures to balance out in the design. So that's why I say Cintiq does what VR can't. And I've learned that clarity in the major forms of a character and its silhouette are kind of critical to a strong design. So assuming I've achieved that with the base sculpt, I then turn my attention to the details, especially any folds and masses that overlap in the character. And unlike the 3D sculpt, the absence of texture details may not break the actual design, but adding the right marks will really make your design sing. And here I'm painting scratch marks and fingerprints in Substance Painter because this character is a seal pup made of a putty rubber. And that's been well used and played with. So the details are really important for selling the idea and this world that I'm building. So now we've seen how VR sculpts are refined further with a Wacom Pro pen, but there's another way that the Cintiq is kind of invaluable to realizing this virtual world I'm building, and it's quite critical given the live format of this show. So down there on my Cintiq, I'm painting onto a 3D canvas in Substance Painter. So it's just a 3D model with me painting on it. The monitor on the left is my renderer, which is Omniverse, and it updates immediately after every brushstroke in Substance. So I can see how the lighting in my rendered scene is going to be affecting the final asset. And the monitor on the right is my actual animated shot in Unreal Engine playing on loop, so I can see if it's going to work in my finished sequence. And all three of these apps are in sync, but my only mode of action as a creator is simply laying down brush strokes on a canvas, which is dope for me, right? Because all of this is being handled behind the scenes. Now, this pipeline is the foundation for the live animated improv show we do with kids in hospitals. The artist can make the canvas respond to the child alongside the live performer playing the character. So it's not just a bit of fancy bit of syncing apps. There's actually has a purpose in my production. So working this way, we've built a world that feels kind of crafted, warm and inviting, tactile even. And the characters, they have bright personalities. They've got to feel alive. The format of the show has an improvised, loose structure, inviting children to explore this world and be confident in how they communicate with the characters. So we need to be able to communicate back just as confidently with our pipeline. Because improvising with the audience kind of embodies the spirit of the show, which is to encourage children to express themselves and, most of all, to just have a go with art. And last but not least, a rendering workflow that kind of brings this whole process full circle. You see, Artina, this character, lives in a junior school classroom, and it's a realistic-looking world. But she has the ability to literally climb into paintings and immerse herself in the artwork. And Flare is a stylized renderer for 3D scenes. I can art direct whatever style I want. You might not be able to see it. I've got a little picture-in-picture here of me painting on the Cintiq. But I paint directly into my 3D scene with my Cintiq. So I'm now bringing my analog sensibilities into a 3D stylized scene as well, which is really exciting because it feels more authentic to the whole concept of the show. So clearly, I embrace everything and replace nothing. But in my defense, humans have been drawing and painting for like 40,000 years. It's one of the oldest forms of communication. It's just not going to go away. And with something as refined as art and design, I found it paramount to retain a visceral connection to my work. And any muscle memory that you might have with hands-on analog art making will only enhance your ability to engage with whatever digital tool emerges next. That's it.